My fellow grievers, tell me if you relate to this question. What if the version of you before your loss is gone forever? If you're anything like me, then that question might resonate a lot. Because the reality of grief and of those seismic moments when, whether it's that we lose someone in our life or there's any other catastrophic loss that brings us to our knees, the reality that I've experienced is that once I'm able to take a breath, stand up and look around, I don't feel the same and the world doesn't look the same. And if you're feeling like this in your grief, just know that it's normal. Know that for so many of us, the world doesn't and will never look the same. With death, there is obviously the ending of those who we're saying goodbye to, but also in a wider spectrum of how death impacts in our life, there are the many other losses that flow through as a result of that death. And big ones for me have been really coming to terms with the fact that actually there is a lot of parts of me that I let go that died when my daughter died. Because when someone dies and parts of us die too alongside them, actually for us, as we continue to move through the world, there are new aspects that get born in those places. So I thought that for today's episode, it could be really cathartic for me, but also perhaps nourishing, perhaps bring inspiration, perhaps bring hope, perhaps just bring resonance for any of you, my fellow grievers, to just hear my story of how death has transformed me. And I wanted to start in the place of heartbreak because it feels like that is the authentic space for us to begin this journey through to transformation. Because when our daughter died, and that was 5 months into pregnancy, she had a birth defect on the back of her skull, which basically meant her skull hadn't formed properly, meaning that there was no chance that she could live outside of the womb for more than 36 hours, if she even got to that point. And my husband and I faced the devastating decision to go through what's called a termination for medical reasons. It was about 21 weeks, or was 21 weeks into pregnancy. And that obviously broke me open. That was the most raw, most visceral experience of anything, any form of pain that I've ever had to go through. I was on my hands and knees in moments. I didn't know if I could get through it. I remember speaking to my friend Christiana in the car on the way back from the hospital saying, I will not get through this alive. There's no way. But step by step, breath by breath, I did and I have. Because the reality of my grief, and it's not shying away from the fact, this tattoo of grief, as I call it, it's lifelong. But it's a tattoo where it's almost like the needle is just constantly going over my skin. So at any point in time, I can connect into that tattoo of grief and I can feel that pain. I can feel the sadness. I can literally feel in my heart. I can feel the crack in my heart from that heartbreak. And that's okay. And if you're journeying with your grief, I just want to send you all of my love, hand to my heart, and just take a breath with you and just say, wherever you are at today, I hope that you can meet yourself exactly where you are. And as we sit in this grief space together, just know that I'm sending you all of my love because it's hard and it hurts. Some days more than others. But actually, in that breaking through, the other thing that I wanted to speak to was very quickly, there was a real sharpening of focus on life. If you followed this podcast, then you might know my story and our story with our daughter and also with my husband, Jordan, and of my mama's promise that I made to my daughter, which was that I was going to be present with her for her stillbirth, well, for her death and then her stillbirth, and all the way through to her woodland burial. And actually, with my mama's promise, it ended up being one of her greatest gifts to us, to me, alongside her being our greatest gift. And that was that actually I found a deeper presence in those 4 weeks than I have ever found at any other point in my life. It was truly, truly incredible. And I'm in awe of myself at that point, nearly now 2 years ago. I'm in awe of how I held it, how I just step by step, breath by breath, I journeyed through. But that real sharpening of focus of life really took me by surprise. And I realized that actually it was in finding presence and calling myself back into presence, because in this journey of finding presence with death and grief, we are also compassionate to ourselves and to our body, and knowing that our body will at times disconnect us because it's so painful. And that's okay. But what we also want to do is to step away from the numbing and avoidance that is our choice, that is a conscious choice to do anything but to be with and to speak to the grief that we're holding. And one of the most surprising things for me after 3 and a bit decades of avoiding, of numbing out on my pain, of just not being present with anything that was difficult. If I could run away, if I could distract myself, if I could jump on my phone, if I could watch Netflix or whatever it is, I would do it. I would do anything but be here in my pain. But actually, what I realized in making that commitment to my daughter and my mother's purpose being like, I'm not gritted teeth, I'm not leaving her side. I know at points this is going to be excruciating. I know that at points time is going to go so slowly, and every single breath is going to feel like a stab into my heart. But I know I'm going to be here. Now, what I didn't realize was that actually being there with her, and by virtue of that, being there with myself, that it turned the volume up on all of life. And I speak about it a lot in this podcast of the technicolor that I experienced, obviously in my pain, but also in realizing my pain was impermanent. There were moments where breathing became more easeful, where things felt normal, albeit holding that grief and knowing that our girl was gone, where things actually were joyful, meeting her in her absolute beauty, the glory, the joy, the depth of love that I felt in that moment. The big belly laughs that my husband is really hilarious, the big belly laughs that we had along the way, where just we would, in the way that death brings in a very curious, dark humor, speak to any end of life doula and ask them, and they will tell you that. Those curious things that just made us crack up and lie on the floor howling in laughter. There was so much of that volume turned up of life. And therein began the start of my transformation. Because actually, once I turned the volume up on life, I knew I didn't want to turn it down. I knew that actually this was how I wanted to live my life. I knew that if I could continue to find that willingness to touch my pain, again, not saying that I'm always perfect, not saying that I'm always present, but as and when I can call myself back to presence and say, hey, hang on a minute, you've been avoiding there. Let's go in and let's go through this pain. I realized the beauty that can unfold both in those moments as well as in life on the other side. So that was my breaking open. Through my heartbreak, I truly shattered into a million pieces. But actually being present with that shattering meant I could pick myself up, that I could be present with that which I was letting go of in that moment. And from those cracks through my heart, through my spirit, through every fiber of my being, what I found was the emergence of something in life that is just so beautiful and so profound. From that place, we have what I call my realizations about myself. I allowed myself to grieve. From that place of deep connection and deep presence with my grief, I then started to realize things about my life. I realized those who are most important to me in my life. I realized a deeper connection to my values and my purpose and my mission in life. I realized actually where I need to put boundaries up, or where I need to let, whether it's people in my life or whether it's certain situations or not honoring myself, go. Because what grief really did for me, if I imagine like I've put layers and layers of this like lacquer like varnish of mask over myself, whether that's my people pleasing mask, whether that's my workaholic mask, whether that's my mask where it's all about conforming and fitting into that which society and our culture deems is successful, I was still wearing all of these layers of my masks. Even after I'd stepped away from my corporate career as a head of marketing in Formula One, I was still holding on to so much. But grief is almost like one of those solvents. It just strips back those layers of the varnish, of the lacquer, of that which is ultimately dulling the wood underneath. It's dulling that beautiful raw with its lovely, gorgeous patterns that tell the whole history of the tree, of the person underneath. And what I found is that grief, it stripped it all away. It really did allow for all of that just in an instant to melt away. And for me, that's really the power that I found in grief. And as I support others in journeying forwards with their grief as a grief coach, I found death and grief to be truly transformational. Because in that moment, when that solvent of grief goes over us and it strips us back to the beautiful, beautiful tree or wood underneath, then what we find is that actually we can immediately see, hey, here's where I need to right now let go of this situation. I need to step away from this. I need to tell this and that person my sacred no. But equally, what we find is that we connect into where we not seizing life in all of our joyful authenticity. And I definitely don't want to position that from the perspective of our success. Now, for some of us, that might be actually, where do I want to achieve success in our life? But I want to position it from the perspective of what is going to bring you the most joy, purpose, and meaning. And that can actually be, much as it was in my own grief journey, a real yearning to just step off of the corporate rat race, to step away from a job that was taking me on business travel to the tune of about 11 to 15 business trips a year. This was in my previous grief, which was actually when I was navigating an early miscarriage in 2021, the grief of which that led me to hand my notice in on my career from Formula One. That was a career where I was working all hours, where I was always on. I was always checking my emails. That took me away from my presence with the simple, beautiful moments with my partner at the time, who's now my husband, with enjoying time out in nature, with my family, etc., etc. It took me away from all of the simple, beautiful joys in life, as well as it really disconnected me from the values and the purpose that truly, truly was trying to guide me, but just couldn't get the airspace to speak. And what I found in both the grief from my early miscarriage, the grief from the death of my granddad, and the grief from the death of our daughter is that it just turns the volume up on all of those wants, all of those desires. Now, the key for us is in answering them. Because actually, so many of us, and I see this so many times where perhaps I hold space for someone in their loss. In fact, there's someone who I love very, very dearly as a friend who lost their father. And I was holding space for her. And she, in those months afterwards, had the absolute clarity. I know that actually I don't want to be burning myself out in my career. I don't want to put my health at risk. I don't want to walk a path where I'm not able to fully enjoy life because I'm always just thinking about how I can work harder for what. But then fast forwards a year and old habits creep back in, business as usual creep back in. So from those realizations, then in our transformation, what we need to flow through is into the opportunities that are presented to us. So this is the next stage in my transformational journey. I realized that actually the opportunities that were ahead of me that truly transformed everything was I'd taken one step out of the corporate world, but there was still one foot in the door from the perspective of certain areas of my business, certain areas of where I was devoting too much energy that just didn't align with where I wanted to be in this world and the imprint that I wanted to do. And prior to my daughter's death and stillbirth, when my granddad before he died, actually, I'd just become really curious about death and grief. And it really ignited a true purpose in me. So I was flowing in this purpose. I was learning. I trained just before my pregnancy with our daughter. I trained to become an end of life doula. I was just fascinated. And I realized from that realizations of what's most important to me in this life, I realized that actually for me, a big part was how am I going to make my impact? And also not just my impact, but also my daughter's legacy and her impact on the world. I felt such a deep sense of purpose through her. So one of the opportunities that I realized was, hey, I want to go and I want to train to be a grief coach, which is exactly what I've done. But then the other sides of things were the opportunities when it came to, hey, I also need to slow down. I also need to walk the path that I've been talking about for a long time towards a life where I can work 3 days a week, because actually I want to maximize my time with my family. I also know that in these opportunities that I need to let go of certain people in my life where I know that they're not cheering me on. I know that there's an energy that doesn't align with, I suppose, the enthusiasm that I give to them about where they're journeying with, or those people where you know that they're in your life and actually they're real sort of time servers, or they're just looking to receive from you but not looking to give. I knew as well that in those opportunities there was a curation that I could very consciously do from this place of, what is my grief speaking to me? What is my grief telling me about life? What is my daughter speaking through my grief? What is she trying to tell me? And really honoring that through actions. And finally, in this episode, we come to my becoming, my integration, the point at which I felt like I had emerged from my little grief cocoon. I had become a new version of me. I had my wings, and I could just flutter them in the sunshine and just, yeah, sit and enjoy this new space that I had entered into. So what did this becoming look like for me? So for me, what I find really powerful in this transformation is when we can look behind and then look to where we are now. We see how far we've come. Going through my grief basically meant a daily practice of presence, of just meeting myself exactly where I was. Some days felt okay, still felt the pain, still missed my daughter, still felt absolutely devastated, but they felt all right. And then other days just felt absolutely devastating. Or other times brought up anxiety. Other times brought up jealousy when I saw in others what I so desperately wished had been my story with our daughter. So a big part of my becoming was integrating grief as a part of me, integrating all of those different aspects, knowing that even the parts that felt really shadowy, whether it's in jealousy, in shame, in anger, they're all a part of me. I'm human, and that's okay. Seeing myself with grace and compassion and integrating that tattoo of grief just into my heart space. But then the other side of things that I noticed was actually I've transformed and I'm different now. I am not the same person anymore. I moved through this world thanks to our daughter with so much more presence, so much more connection, so much more compassion. I was a coach before our daughter died, but actually the way that I sit with others now, I can't even explain just the depth of presence that I feel with someone, including specifically when they are going through it in grief or anything else that feels uncomfortable or difficult. But through my presence, I'm willing to just sit, lean in, and be there. So a big part of my becoming has just been feeling my feet on the earth, feeling how different I feel in just how I show up, noticing how in turning the volume up on life through allowing for that transformation, through allowing for all of those messages to come through, allowing me to slow down, to be more present, to connect into the simple joys in life, to really root into my life purpose and to move forwards from that place. I can really feel so viscerally just how much the technicolor of life has turned up. How much when I move through even things that in the past I would have thought were just totally and utterly mundane, how much pleasure I get from just walking down the street, noticing something really beautiful in nature, or from spending a moment when I'm rushing around connecting with our pups. It's the little things in life that really make a big difference. I know it for sure. And a big part of my transformation, I know, has been a rerouting into the simple joys in life, but also into a rooting into my new purpose, a deepening into the death and grief space, and bringing that into everything that I do, including through my business, including through this podcast, including through the grief coaching where I support others. So that's also been a really big one where I've also been able to look and say, hey, my grief was telling me there's a path that's opening, which could also just make my heart burst in how I can support others. I'm going to go down there. And what that has also taught me is, because before, if you'd have asked me, oh, do you want to go into grief coaching? I probably said, yeah, but is that what, quote unquote, society sees success as? Because in my mind, I was still stuck in that kind of like corporate view of success. And actually, for me, what that meant was I put more of a weighting onto the corporate work, the big consultancy projects that I was doing, versus saying, nah, I can be wholeheartedly all in this grief coaching space. And that, for me, my new definition of success is, am I making an impact on others? Am I able to easily create abundance in my life where I can support myself and my family? Yes, then that's success. I don't need to fit into anyone else's boxes. And that's really the power of grief and everything. I can feel my energy just really lit up through this episode and this conversation. That really is the power of grief. So I'm going to close out this episode here just with the invitation. If you're going through grief, it's not to say that right now you're going to be able to say, yeah, I see, they're the opportunities for me to grow through my grief. Absolutely not essential, not necessary at any point. Just meet yourself where you are. But with that gentle presence and connection with your grief, just see, is there any little messages, transformational opportunities, areas where you're being called to grow, called to let go, called to allow for the emergence of new beginnings in you? Is there any of those little invitations? See if you can connect into them, perhaps write them down in a journal, capture them, and then see, is there one step that I can take forwards today towards whatever direction that I'm being asked to journey in? So I want to end this episode just with a note to myself, and that you can take forwards if this feels inspiring for you. And that is just simply a note of gratitude, a note of gratitude to all of me that carried me through that fire of grief. A note to self where I can just, and I'm going to do this a bit later on as a practice, where I can just write out all of my gratitude to those bits that I had to let go of. That grief forced my transformation, and that letting go of those perspectives and those parts of me, but also a gratitude for me, who I have become. So before I come into my final words, just to say that if you enjoyed this episode, perhaps there's someone in your life who would also really take a lot from it, maybe meeting them where they are in their grief. So perhaps send this episode, share it with a friend, share it with a family member, as well as if you could just hit the subscribe button. That is the single most thing that you can do to support my podcast, as well as if you want to take it a little bit deeper and you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can rate my podcast on both of those. Give it the 5 stars if you feel like that is warranting, as well as on Apple, you can leave a review. But wherever you are in your journey, my hand to heart and my heart to yours, know that I'm here with you. We're walking this path forwards with grief. Death on the Daily is always here, as well as I'm here as a grief coach. If you want to reach out, then hit the show notes to find out exactly where you can. And know that wherever you are in your journey, step by step, breath by breath, we walk this path together, and I'm sending you lots and lots of love. All of my gratitude to you for joining me for another Dead Conversation. Death on the Daily is edited by David Strutt. The music is Set Free by Katie Gray. And I am Tanya Wilkinson. And if you enjoyed this episode, I would be over the moon if you can rate, review, and subscribe. It really, really helps me to get the word out there. And if you want to say hi or to hear more about my work as a coach and death doula, including how I support my clients to navigate their death on the daily, then all of the ways that you can connect with me are in the show notes. I'll be back soon with some more Dead Conversations. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and others.
There's a cold fire, there's a crossfire.